Our panelists today, our speakers today, have far more experience than I do in this field, and I'm grateful that they're here to share their expertise. We'll first hear from Sharon Eubank, who is the Director of Humanitarian Services for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She previously served as the first counselor in the Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And for those who are not familiar with the Relief Society, it's a women's organization involved in education and service, and includes millions of women in probably 190 or so countries around the world. We'll then be pleased to hear from Mariana McGlasson, who is the director of the Deakin University Center for Humanitarian Leadership in Australia. She comes to that position with about 20 years in practice as a family nurse practitioner and about a decade of experience on the ground designing and implementing humanitarian and development projects in various regions of the world. So also a wealth of humanitarian experience. So we'll turn the time over to Sharon.
I'm so happy to be with you. I'm a fan of this program, and I just want to thank Sister Corey and Imam Marzouk. You touched me with your personal reflections, and I really, really appreciated being here with you. Thank you very much. We were talking at lunch at our table that so much of what humanitarian work focuses on are the immediate crises, the things that are going on that are just, right in front of your eyes. But the ability to build resilience is the more important work. It's the work that interests me. And so much of what's happening in the world right now is being driven by emergency disasters and extreme weather and also conflict. And so I've thought a lot about what would it take for me to introduce or develop in the work that I do resilience for the drivers of conflict, particularly religious and ethnic conflict that is driving so much of displacement right now in the world. There's a lot of things we can do to improve our resiliency. I brought some pictures for you. I hope you won't mind. My dad was a weatherman, and so he can't work without a map, so I got to have a map. This is a photograph that was taken out of the New York Times. Do you know what that is? Can you tell what it is? It's the dam in Ukraine that was blown, and then all of that tons of water that went flying downriver, and it's caused such a terrible catastrophe on so many levels, in so many different ways. And as human beings, we have an enormous capacity to change, but we are incredibly resistant to change. It's an interesting conundrum in that way. The results pyramid, if you've ever seen this, it says if you want to change things, we always talk about results and we talk about people's actions and we even get down into their beliefs, but people don't change unless you change their experiences. And this has been transformative for me in humanitarian work. What could I do to change somebody's experiences so that they would have, that the world would be more peaceful, more resilient, less conflict-ridden, those kinds of things. So Professor McGlasson and I have this very interesting topic of talking about change and the roles of religious organizations in humanitarian or societal well-being and change. And like other disciplines, we often will come to it. We're going to earnestly talk to you about duty and principles and goals, or we will show you data, or we will deconstruct behavior. That is not as motivating as if we will have a powerful emotional experience. So years ago, I worked with a business consultant. He had come to help us kind of restructure what we were doing to do it on a larger scale. And he said, Sharon, there are 3 powerful drivers for people to change their behavior or their beliefs. He said it's humor, it's music, and it's a powerful emotional or a spiritual experience. And I thought, oh, come on, that's so kumbaya, humor and music. But it largely turns out to be true. I have thought about that for the 10 years since I learned that. So in the humanitarian context, I thought I would talk a little bit about these 3 drivers: humor, music, and a significant emotional experience. I learned a long time ago there is no significant change without a significant relationship, and I really believe that. So in a humanitarian context, when we're trying to combat the results of very bad behavior or experiences, some of the activities that we try to do, and many of you are involved in this as well, we look for activities that people can do together. So this is a picture of the destroyed Catholic Cathedral, the Syriac Church, and also the mosque in the city of Mosul. And as part of a UNESCO project, they said, all right, Muslim community, you're going to rebuild the cathedral. And Christian community, you're going to help rebuild the mosque. That kind of an exchange has been very powerful. I just read this Easter, just a few months ago, they held the first Mass again in that church that's been rebuilt. That's very, very powerful for people to do that. Another activity that I see work over and over again is sports. You cannot have sports if people aren't willing to follow the rules, and you can't have any fun unless they do that teamwork. These are refugees from different tribes that the Catholic Church set up in Italy to play football, to have football leagues. And they loved doing it. And they're specifically paired with people from different ethnicities, different tribes, different faiths, so that they can work together as a team in sports. And that's effective because of us. Music is also effective. You cannot play music with other musicians if you won't follow the rules. And so that builds unity. And I'm always looking for activities like that. These are Yazidi kids who have been displaced for almost a decade, playing their religious music and sharing it with me as a Christian. So these abilities for communities to work together on the problems that are in the community and share each other's backgrounds and not avoid faith, but share the strengths of faith, inclusive faith, I think is personal to what we heard from Imam Marzouk and from Sister Corey. So these are just experiences that I've had. All right, let's get to humor. I've never thought about humor as a lever for humanitarian experiences, but I wanted to share something with you. There's a group that has a very unfunny name. It's called the Association of Religious Data Archives. But they're doing really interesting research on the intersection between humor and religion. So David Briggs is writing for this group, and he said, this new wave of research on religion and humor is presenting a different picture to the world, one where concern for free speech is balanced by a sense of responsibility to not use humor as a sword to inflame hatred. So there's lots of humor that makes fun of marginalized groups. So you can everybody's a target. The LGBT community and obese people and women in the workforce and faith and religion and all of those things. That doesn't take any skill. That is low humor that just goes for, and it builds on people's prejudices. When people say something that's offensive or prejudiced, and then they just say, I'm just joking, that is almost saying, it's just a pass, it's just a joke. And if you don't laugh, you can't take the joke. But that is a pass for people who are ignoring the fact or pretending that they're not, entrenching people's prejudices and making them worse. Well, is there humor that could make it better? I got online and tried to find an example to show you. So here's what I'm going to show you. So this is a 25-second clip of a Muslim comedian. His name is Gibran Salim. And he's just going to tell you just one little joke. I thought this was great.
Is a lot of times when I meet people and I say my name, I feel like they only hear what they're already expecting, right? Because I'll meet someone and I'll be like, hi, my name's Gibran. They'll be like, oh, nice to meet you, Muhammad. I'll be like, what? How in the world did they get my middle name? That is amazing.
So you're laughing, and it's 25 seconds, and look what he has done in a non-confrontational way, in an easy way. He gets us just to laugh a little bit at our curiosity of how many people are named Muhammad, but also, reflect on our prejudices, that all people are not the same, and that we need to deal with people individually. And he did that in 25 seconds, and we laughed. There's something really powerful about that. So I want to think more about ways to use humor to break down prejudices and to build society in positive ways and not negative ways. Okay, here's music. Are we back on? No? So if you're from my faith, or maybe you watch this on TV, this is the tabernacle. The tabernacle was built when the Mormon pioneers came into this valley after intense religious persecution, and they wanted to worship and they wanted to sing. And it's a very interesting domed building. It has this giant pipe organ. And our anthem from the Tabernacle Choir is, "Come, come ye saints. We'll find the place which God for us prepared far away in the west." So I'm the 5th generation of those people who came far away in the west. And there was a specific program that I participated in that took songs of ministry, songs of faith that got people through persecution. So we sat in those famous tabernacle seats and we sang the songs of resilience from different faiths. And I got to tell you, I never sit in the tabernacle choir seat. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking out and we're singing, "We'll find the place which God for us prepared." It was so moving to me, that musical experience. But I got to tell you, it was just as moving when we sang the song that was written by Charles Wesley, "Jesus, Lover of My Soul," that he wrote when he was in hiding from persecutors in somebody's milk barn. And I really learned to love that, and I sang it out. And then we participated in a recording of Yazidi music that they're singing to try and heal their community after all the difficult experiences of being driven and enslaved by ISIS and how important that is in their community. I had that experience, and I got to tell you, I felt differently. I felt connected to my faith, and I felt stronger about their resilience in the face of their persecution and a desire to bond. That was a really important thing for me that I would have never gotten by watching a PowerPoint full of data about how music heals people. You have to do it with your body. You have to participate. The significant emotional experience. This is Gary Kowalski. He's a Unitarian minister, and he said, for faith to be a cohesive force, it has to be inclusive rather than exclusive, universal rather than narrowly sectarian in its sympathies. Okay, so let me just introduce you to Candace and Rob Bateman. Rob is the stake president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. This is also Bubbles and Surrender Singh Kandari. And they are the principals of the Guru Nanak Darbar Sikh Temple in Dubai. So Rob and Surrender met at a religious freedom conference sponsored by the G20. And they sat by each other, and then they flew home together to the UAE on the plane. And they said, look, we've been there, we've heard all this stuff, let's do something. What could we do together? So at the temple, every day, they feed 10,000 people. There are so many foreign workers. They live in cramped housing with little hot plates that there are so many people there. And so the temple feeds 10,000 people every single day. Here's an example of that. They put on a vegetarian meal. Anybody can come. So Rob said, what if we provide hygiene items that we could also give out? So people very limited with their expenses and with hygiene. So their communities came together and they started to work. They put all these things together, and then on Diwali, the festival, they gave these out. And it was such a powerful experience with the communities to stand next to each other. They would have never known each other living in the United Arab Emirates, and talk about their faith and their families and what's important to them and the things they struggle with. And they had this great experience. And then, freakily, shockingly, President Bateman, running on his treadmill, passed away. He had a heart attack. He was a young man. And so now every single year, in memory of him and their friendship, they do this project over and over again. The communities continue to get together, and they work on behalf of this new work and the people in the community to make their lives happy and joyful and more pleasant. And it has bonded a community that would have never known one another. So these positive shared experiences among faiths, I believe, is what strengthens resilience in society. So one of the tools that my organization has sponsored that's free and open for anybody is this app called Just Serve. So I just want to show you another little clip. It's quick.
At the time of the Paris bombings, I became quite upset about the amount of hate and vitriol that was being spread, often by people who were ignorant of others who were different, and thought that somebody has to do something.
We got together and had the first meeting in December We had 5 Muslims, 5 Mormons, and 5 Methodist women. We met here at my house. We decided to do some cookie baking and to have a religious discussion. And we were all, I think, surprised at how drawn we felt to one another.
It was actually really energizing, refreshing, exciting to see the similarities that we had, the openness, and the willingness to really learn more about each other's faiths.
When I came into the room, we were all being very polite and very formal. And as the evening rolled on and we started making connections. Oh, you have a boy in high school, so do I. Maybe they know each other. And you start realizing how much you have in common, that we were just a bunch of moms wanting to raise their kids.
The Just Serve website is the main source of the community outreach for Tapestry in the Minneapolis area. There were so many women in this good community who wanted to participate that we would go to the Methodist church and do a service project one month, and then the next month we would be at the Lutheran church, and then the Catholics and the Muslims helped us with the homeless youth food drive. And so we drew our youth in as well to teach them about service.
Seeing kids walking down the street talking, all in different faith communities, but they're all just kids, and they knew that they were serving a purpose together. Just seeing that interfaith interaction made me super happy.
It was a really cool experience. That was my first time going inside of a mosque, and we had to take off our shoes. And it was really cool. I saw one of my friends from school there, and I didn't know that I'd see her there. And we're like, oh, hi, how are you doing?
I loved that. The kids walked in and they could realize I'm hearing Arabic. This is not scary. And then they get to share that with other people. It's not anything to be afraid of.
The message I feel like is coming out in the church right now, especially in women's conference, that we all have been refugees at some point. When my husband and I were newlyweds, we had no money, we had no furniture. And I'll never forget the first families who invited us over for dinner, the family who gave us a couch. And so if I see somebody who is in that situation, I know what it feels like. We're all children of God. We are all brothers and sisters.
If you have any interest, if you ever want to post a project, Just Serve is open to anybody in the world, and you can post a project and bring people together and try and create that in some of the areas that you're interested in. I put this quote up because as I conclude, I just want to say that during natural disasters or during crises, the most resilient communities are not the wealthiest ones. They're not the people who have spent the most on infrastructure. They're the ones with the strongest social infrastructure. So for me, as we see each other get polarized in our communities, as we look to how do we weave social fabric back together, one of the greatest things I can think about is to have a social experience with people who are different from me. So here's my call to action. Find somebody who's of a different faith or of a different persuasion and do something with them. I don't care what it is. You can invite them to do anything. But I promise you, in 10 minutes, you will have a significant experience. And that isn't just because we attended this conference or anything else. It's how we build resilience. And for the times that are coming in this world, religion needs to give evidence that we are the solution. What we do is the solution to weave people back together. So it's my invitation to you, it's my invitation to myself, and I'm eager to hear Professor McGlasson, and then maybe we can discuss this a little bit further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And as Sharon mentioned, we hope to have some time at the end of this session for questions. So as Mariana takes the podium, please be thinking also of questions you'd like to ask. Mariana.
Hi, everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you today and a tough act to follow. I didn't bring any photos. I thought about it, but the photos are amazing and the videos and the music. I stand before you today with a story, an inspiring tale, which will unravel the historical roots of humanitarianism and the profound impact of faith-based actors in shaping our world. But before we dive into the depths of history, let me share a lighthearted moment with you from my own journey. As in the introduction, you would have heard that I'm a nurse practitioner by training. It's a field that I love. But I became a humanitarian aid worker about halfway through that career, thinking it would be a very short stint. I thought I would pop over and do a quick assignment with Doctors Without Borders. It was like a life goal of mine. But I never really went back full time to my really wonderful, lucrative, happy career as a nurse practitioner. I actually found I was really well suited for this international work, and there were huge needs out there that I thought that I could make a difference with. So I never really went back. So for the past 12, 13 years, I've been working primarily as a humanitarian aid worker in some of the world's worst crises. And for the last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of leading as the executive director of the Center for Humanitarian Leadership at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. We have a vision of a humanitarian system that elevates local actors, centers the agency of affected communities, respects diverse perspectives, and furthers social justice. That's our mission statement. It's much longer than that. That's our short version. After working in some of the world's most horrible disasters and conflicts, I thought nothing could faze me, but life had other plans. Exactly 1 year ago today, I found out I was pregnant with twins. It's been an exhilarating whirlwind of joy and a lot of chaos. But like any good humanitarian, when I had the opportunity to come and speak here today about a topic for which I cared deeply, I couldn't resist. So picture me, a new mom, this is my first time doing this, with a double stroller, maneuvering airport security like a pro, which is one of my pet peeves because, all this travel I've done, I like to really zip through airports. That doesn't happen anymore. 2 small babies, and then trying to keep them entertained for a 14-hour flight from Melbourne to Los Angeles. Thankfully, my incredible husband has risen to the occasion, and he's currently managing 5-month-old twins in a hotel room. And as I look around, I know I'm surrounded by people of faith. So if you could say a little prayer for him, I would really be grateful for all of them. Amidst this exhilarating roller coaster ride, I couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary power of human connection. Here I stand, connected to each and every one of you for a brief moment in time where we possess a remarkable opportunity together. We can harness our collective energy to make a profound impact through humanitarian action. And just a note, Sharon and I just met today. We did not coordinate our talks, but you'll see a theme coming through this. Through leadership and genuine connections, we can bridge divides, amplify empathy, and foster a sense of unity that transcends boundaries. Even in the past 24 hours, getting to know some of my fellow speakers, have been challenged in my thinking, and I've had an opportunity to learn and grow. And I think that's for the better. These brief interactions with people of other faiths and other backgrounds have shaped me just in the last 24 hours. I've been impressed and encouraged by the many panelists I've heard throughout the day, and I have loved hearing people talk about pluralism, respect, and dignity again and again. After all, human dignity is the very foundation of humanitarian action, and that's what I've dedicated my whole life to. As of 2022, the United Nations Global Humanitarian Overview unveiled a stark reality. An estimated 274 million people worldwide are currently in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Among those, 183 million are classified as the most in need, and those people require at least $41 billion to support them across 63 countries. This figure, unfortunately, marks the highest recorded in decades, and the well-being of approximately 3% of the global population is at risk. Their dignity is actively declining. Compounding this crisis, around 2 billion individuals find themselves trapped in active conflict zones. That's 25% of the people on the planet, caught amid violence and turmoil. And while it might sound trite, it's an undeniable truth. The urgency for humanitarian action has never been more paramount than it is now. Today, I'd like to take you on a short historical tour, starting in the late 19th century, a time of other ravaging wars and profound suffering across Europe. It's within this chaos that 2 individuals emerged, driven by faith and deep compassion. Their legacies will forever shape the way we respond to crises. Their names were Henry Dunant and one of my personal heroes as a nurse, Florence Nightingale. In 1859, Henry Dunant, a Swiss businessman and philanthropist, witnessed the aftermath of the Battle of Solferino in Italy. Thousands of wounded soldiers lay literally abandoned in the battlefield, devoid of medical care or solace. Deeply touched by this tragedy, Dunant was compelled to act. Inspired by his Christian beliefs, he mobilized local communities to provide aid and comfort to the wounded, regardless of their nationality. He went on to write a book about his experience and dedicated most of the remaining years of his life to establishing the Red Cross. He was instrumental in the birth of the Geneva Conventions, which safeguard the rights and the dignity of those affected by armed conflicts even till today. For his efforts, he received the very first Nobel Peace Prize in 1901. Around the same time, another remarkable figure was leaving her mark, Florence Nightingale, often hailed as the pioneer of modern nursing. Driven by her deep devotion to her Christian faith, Nightingale felt a calling to care for the sick and the wounded. During the Crimean War, she organized a team of nurses and tirelessly worked to provide essential medical care. Her unwavering dedication transformed nursing into a respected profession, thank you, Florence, and paved the way for the professionalization of humanitarian healthcare even until now. Dunant and Nightingale's stories illuminate the historical role of faith-based actors in humanitarian action. Their faith acted as a compass, guiding them to those in need. Their actions were driven not merely by philanthropy, but by a profound sense of duty rooted in their religious beliefs. They recognized the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, and their faith inspired them to act in the face. Everyone okay? Okay. Everybody's safe? Good, I didn't want the clock anyway. It's perfect. They were driven to save lives and reduce suffering, even when it came at a deeply personal cost. Today, faith-based actors continue to play a crucial role in shaping our response to crises. With tens of thousands of volunteers and substantial financial resources, faith-based organizations possess significant power to protect dignity and alleviate human suffering. Their grassroots presence allows them to respond swiftly and effectively, reaching those who are often overlooked or completely marginalized. Their intimate knowledge of local customs, traditions, and languages establishes trust and enables effective communication with affected communities. However, we must also acknowledge that there are ethical considerations and limitations that may arise when faith-based actors, especially volunteers, engage in humanitarian response. Good intentions alone are not always good enough. Humanitarian aid often, if not always, comes on the very worst day of someone's life, and it needs to be delivered in a way that respects that very sacred space of sharing in another human being's suffering. Deep harm can be done when aid is not delivered in a manner that respects and upholds the dignity of the other person. Impartiality and non-discrimination are essential, as aid must be provided without bias of any kind. Guided by humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and respect for diversity, our actions should ensure assistance reaches all who need it, regardless of their faith or lack thereof. It is therefore crucial for faith-based organizations and leaders to establish and uphold a code of conduct for their employees and volunteers, and most organizations do. This ensures alignment with humanitarian principles and maintains the integrity of their efforts. Leaders must provide training, guidance, and support, nurturing a culture of personal leadership behaviors, ethical decision-making, and accountability. This act alone, just making code of conducts and making sure people are trained on those, that will improve the humanitarian efforts of a single organization. But let's take it one step further. For the past several decades at least, mainstream humanitarian action has been viewed as a primarily secular endeavor, leaving many faith-based organizations feeling pushed a bit to the periphery. Suspicion has grown among actors of different faiths and between secular and faith-based organizations. I propose that we can do better. In the pluriverse of cultures, languages, worldviews, and ways of being, surely there is a seat at the table for everyone committed to preserving the dignity, autonomy, and agency of every human. In a world where humanitarian needs continually outpace our ability to meet them, can we imagine a world where both multi-faith actors and secular organizations can equally unite around common humanitarian principles and values? Is there space to develop and champion a multi-faith code of conduct which can guide practical action on the ground? To truly harness the potential of multi-faith actors, Collaboration and partnership are key. By forging alliances with people from other faiths and secular humanitarian organizations, we can leverage the respective strengths of both and create a more comprehensive and effective response. Through dialogue and cooperation, similar to what you were talking about, we can bridge divides and work together towards a shared goal to alleviate human suffering and promote the inherent dignity of all people. But I'm not naive. I know that we must acknowledge the challenges that can arise from religious differences. And I don't think Sharon's naive either. It's not just playing music together that's going to solve all the problems in the world, but it's a really good start. Serving together is a really good start to bridge those divides. To overcome those barriers and those deep-rooted prejudices, it will require us to foster an environment where diverse multi-faith actors can unite in a common cause through genuine listening and cooperation. Establishing a multi-faith code of conduct for humanitarian response can serve as a deeply practical guiding framework for people of all faiths. Such a code would reflect shared values across faith traditions, ensuring impartiality, non-discrimination, and respect for the dignity of all individuals. It would inspire faith-based actors worldwide to work together, transcending divisions and making a tangible difference in the lives of those affected by crisis. It would also go a long way to resolve the long-standing tensions between faith-based actors and secular humanitarian organizations. To achieve this vision, we need collaboration, structured dialogue, collective commitment to bridge religious divides. Let's reach out to faith leaders, humanitarian organizations, and individuals from diverse backgrounds. Together, we can embark on a journey of understanding, recognizing that our shared humanity is stronger than any of the differences that might separate us. I implore each of you and myself, faith leaders, humanitarian donors, humanitarian workers, and anyone in this room who cares deeply about the well-being of others to take action. Go on Just Serve. Find a project. Take action in these spaces. This is not a lofty dream. It's an attainable reality. I truly believe with the right leadership, we could have a humanitarian code of conduct for multi-faith actors within the next 1 to 2 years. I don't think this is an impossible feat. It will start with guided conversations, with reaching out to fellow faith-based actors and engaging in open dialogue. It will require us to listen, to understand one another's perspectives, and to seek common ground. By doing so, we can build trust, dissolve prejudice, and unlock the true potential of collaboration. And I think, as to what Sharon was talking about, this creates the very social cohesion we need to survive crisis when it comes to our own doorstep. Let us advocate for the integration of this interfaith code of conduct into the policies and practices of faith-based organizations, humanitarian agencies, and governments. I've heard a lot over the last day about some really incredible lobbying and government-focused work that people in this room have been doing. I think there's so much power among the people in this room. It doesn't need to stop there. Once we have a code of conduct, we then have to hold ourselves accountable to the commitments we make. We need leaders who take a stand, guiding their own faith communities and humanitarian teams to uphold the highest ethical standards. By nurturing a culture of integrity, transparency, respect for the dignity, agency, and autonomy of all people, our actions will align with the principles of the multi-faith code of conduct. Lastly, let us share stories of collaboration, compassion, and the positive impact of faith-based actors in humanitarian response. By amplifying these narratives, we remind the world of their tremendous value and inspire, hopefully, many, many others to follow in their footsteps. In the spirit of Henry Dunant and Florence Nightingale, and the many, many, many other giants who paved the way, let us heed the call of our faiths and the cries of those in need. Let us honor their legacies by continuing their mission to alleviate suffering and build a just and compassionate world. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne, and thanks to you both for those really inspiring, warm, challenging, thoughtful presentations. You literally brought down the house. It's close to Father's Day, so I figured I could get away with a dad joke. We have some time, some intentional time here in this session for questions. We've got microphones at both sides of the room. We're streaming this and recording it, so important to come to the microphone. But please, if you have a question, come to the microphone and introduce yourself, and we'll have a response from our panelists. So let me just restate the question. The question is whether there is a code of conduct for secular humanitarian organizations that this religious code of conduct would parallel.
Yeah, great question. There are references throughout the International Committee of the Red Cross. There's a code of conduct there for all humanitarian action. But what I think is missing is a specifically faith-based, multi-faith initiative to say we not only agree with these principles and this general code of conduct, but we want to double down and talk between us about how we operate in the humanitarian space. I think this is something that's missing. And because of that, it's created a little bit of suspicion between those secular organizations and the faith-based organizations, which I think is entirely unhelpful to the cause of humanitarianism.
Maybe while we're waiting for people to come up, we could start sort of developing that here. I know, Sharon, you have extensive experience in humanitarian efforts with actors of other faiths. And Mariana, your center, it sounds like, is looking at these principles. What sort of best practices or principles would you include in that, or have you seen being particularly effective in interfaith humanitarian work?
Well, since I come from a faith that is known for proselytizing, one of the most important things I think to be involved in humanitarian work, I can even hold it. I'm not sure it's turned on. Is it better?
There we go.
I was just saying that coming from a faith that does active proselytizing, it's important to be able to say, this is separate work from that. And it needs to be that way because, as Professor McGlasson said, we are working with people on the worst day of their life. That's not the right opportunity to teach about faith. What it is the right opportunity to is to minister according to our faith, to show our compassionate principles in action. But because we're so enthusiastic, a code of conduct really helps us know in what arenas should we work in which situations. And so for lots of reasons, I think there are certain faith applications that could be magnified by a code of conduct that would help people know what's appropriate and what would help me have the best effect that I want to have. Would you add?
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think there's a time and a place for sharing faith, and on someone's worst day of their life, I think of it as a sacred space. As a nurse, you find yourself often in the space of someone's last day with their family, and that's a very sacred and special time. And I think of my humanitarian work as an extension of that. And when you're with an entire community that's just been devastated, they just need the food, the water, the shelter, the medicine, and living out your faith, and whatever that expression is for each of the different faiths, the commonality is goodness, kindness, and respect for the dignity of persons. And I think a code of conduct where everyone agrees to those principles, I think it makes it a safer space for all faith-based actors. Because if 95% of faith-based actors are operating among the same sort of general objectives, and there's one organization that's not, it actually creates a lot of knock-on effects for all of the other organizations as well.
And I want to also protect the space, and we're having this discussion here. At the same time, I shouldn't feel restricted to describe that I'm doing this out of my own value base and my own faith. And we shouldn't have to feel like we have to hide that in order to do credible work. I was really, when Corey stood up and she said, I'm here because of Jesus Christ. I'm doing this work because of my Christian experience. That's really powerful and motivating. It's not putting pressure on other people. I'm telling you about myself.
Exactly.
Thank you. We have questions on both sides, and David, invite you to go to the microphone. Yeah, please.
Okay, let me go ahead.
First and then
Ladies
second, and
first.
then David.
So thank you both, or thank you all three. And to the code of conduct that crosses, I've worked for secular organizations, Save the Children, and now I'm with Church World Service. And 2 points, and I've worked around the world, mostly in Central and Southeast Asia. The knock-on, what we as Western humanitarian organizations, development organizations can agree to, and then when we're in the field with our Buddhist and nonprofit partners, our Muslim partners, our other religious-based partners, how then do you get those national organizations, regional organizations to sign on similarly, right, in their own countries where there are huge sectarian divides and often conflict? And then the other piece is organizations that they want to keep the proselytizing and the kitchen, the food pantry together. They want them to be, so there's a couple of big challenge points there to make it come together as a multi-sectoral code of conduct. So if you could speak to any of those.
Let's take the
Thank
second
you.
question, and then we'll have multiple topics potentially. Please.
Yeah, this is kind of from Sharon's presentation, but I'd love to hear both your thoughts. In that presentation, you shared various examples of how faith-based humanitarian service is building unity across differences, and I think we've seen a lot of evidence of that out there. But there kind of remains, particularly in the media, this narrative that religion is a source of division, is divisive. Just curious for your thoughts on the experience. How do you overcome that through things like what you guys do, or other things, frankly, that could just help people recognize that unifying power that faith and religion can bring?
Thank you for those questions. David, I'm going to invite you to the microphone now, and we'll take those three to make sure we get them in the time we have.
David Owens, Advisory Council Emeritus. How do you determine
Fix that.
that humanitarian aid is used and delivered for the purpose for which it's intended?
Thank you.
Well, can we just start with the last one? I don't know that a humanitarian program is complete in any way without what we call MEAL. It's measurement, evaluation, accountability, and learning. If you don't have mechanisms to follow what you have done to the very end of the row and be accountable for it, and to learn from what happened, because it's not a science, there's going to be a lot of things that happen along that road, then you're not fully participating in the humanitarian spectrum. And I really feel like mistakes are powerful teachers, and so you have to have that in place to be able to learn to address problems. And I know you feel similarly.
I agree 100%. And I would also say that I think in the West, we've developed this whole idea that a lot of humanitarian aid is going to the wrong direction. In my experience, if you have found a community that is actually in need, and I give them the thing that they've asked for, when I do my monitoring and evaluation and learning, I find really good results. So it's actually this whole continuum of the beginning. What community are you going to? What's the need that they have? Have you listened to them am I giving them blankets when they've asked me for water? If I give them blankets, of course they're going to sell the blankets to buy the water. So I think there are a lot of questions to ask all along that cycle to make sure you're targeting the community with the right kind of thing, and then following it all the way down to the end user. And then getting feedback from them. How did we do? What can we do better next time? And then incorporating that feedback. I think people get awfully concerned, especially in some of the worst conflict zones, that if money especially is sent to a community, that it might be used for bad purposes. We don't actually have evidence that that happens as often as people think it is. It's this giant elephant we've created. But in my experience, in some pretty nasty places in the world where active conflict and armed groups were actively trying to steal things, it was not as big of a problem as people expected it to be. But of course, we have the systems in place to double check that and cross check and triangulate.
Maybe I could segue from that into this question about media, because the fourth estate is critical to free societies. They are holding power accountable, which is critical. But I think a lot of times the media takes the opportunity to expose evil and doesn't emphasize as much their stewardship to also build what is good. And we have the opportunity to interact with journalism in the settings where we are, in conferences like this, and help develop that underdeveloped side of media so that we don't have this disparity that religion is creating all the divisiveness in the world. Because the fact is, the truth is, most social services are given by faith-based organizations in the world.
And then the first question, right, was about sort of the challenges of creating this multi-faith where there are local actors or regional actors or those who don't want to abide by it, who want to keep proselytism and service together.
I don't have all the answers for that. I think that's where we ask leaders to come together and start those conversations. I would never pretend to have this all mapped out. I think a starting point is those conversations. Get the leaders in the room from the different faiths. Get representatives from the local organizations to ask them. Maybe there's a space to have charities run by churches, but let's not call it humanitarian work. It's perfectly acceptable for a church to run a whole bunch of charity services and proselytize within those, but it needs to be clearly marked as such, rather than saying, okay, we're going to jump into the middle of a conflict zone and provide food for people along with other messaging that might not be helpful in that very same moment. So I think there are a lot of conversations that need to be had. I think that there are plenty of leaders in this room, and I would bet that if we were to start mapping out the other leaders that you leaders are connected with in different fields and different specialties around the world, we've got a pretty powerful quorum of people who could make something really important happen. Do you want to add anything to that?
That's perfect. Any other questions? Please, if you'll come up to the microphone.
Sharon, I really enjoyed your insight. Not enjoyed, was intrigued by it, that it's not the communities with the most amount of money who succeed in time of crisis, but those with the strongest social infrastructures. I'm wondering what you've both seen that strengthen those social infrastructures, which I think in the Western psyche and mindset, we don't always factor as well. We see money and wealth as being what will protect us in crises, but actually from your experience, you're saying it's something else. Could you just talk to us more about what that is and what strengthens those social infrastructures?
I can give an example. I saw just about 6 months ago, a hurricane hit Florida, and an HOA president said, you know what, we're flooded. So they have first floor story underwater. And this is just one example of a lot of things. But they decided as an HOA group to check on each other. There was a woman having a baby in her house. There was a man who needed insulin. They got a bunch of boats. They picked up people. They started a community. They were just taking care of each other in this disaster. And the structure they were using was an HOA. And we don't think in humanitarian terms about, hey, we could leverage HOAs. But it was very powerful in that instance. And I think there are forgotten infrastructure that could be easily leveraged to build back social fabric in a disaster or even not in a disaster that would create the resilience ahead of time.
I would agree. I could give another 1,000 examples of where I've seen that same idea work in international settings. One thing I think we forget, I'm a humanitarian aid worker. I can list all the statistics of where the money comes from and who are the big donors and who's doing all the big work in terms of dollars and programs. But I bet if we had a way of measuring it, you would find that most humanitarian aid is actually neighbor to neighbor, community to community, house by house. It's the Syrian family coming across the border to Turkey. They don't even speak the same language, but the mother is going into the cupboard and pulling out the extra blankets and the extra pots and pans and the kilo of rice, and here's a bit of sugar. We don't have a way of measuring that, but I actually think that most surviving happening at the community level is neighbor to neighbor, and that doesn't receive any media either. And I think if we can tell some of those stories, it starts to help us think closer to home. How can I build that kind of cohesion here? Who are my neighbors? Who's having a baby in the house? Who needs insulin? So that when that emergency happens, you think, who's in your immediate surroundings? That's what's happening in places where community, the fabric of the community is still in place.
And every aid organization, no matter how big they are, they have to go down to the grassroots to be effective. They have to go down and find those small, local grassroots infrastructures because that's where the work gets done. And often that's through a faith-based organization. Yeah. You touched on something, and so my final comment is, you heard a lot of things today, and you're going to walk out of here, and I just want to encourage you, like Rob Bateman and Surinder Kandari, what are you going to do? What are you going to decide of your own abilities and talents and network and expertise? Walk out of here and commit yourself to do something about humanitarian and faith-based organizations in your circle. And I hope you'll take that invitation. You'll be transformed.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Sharon and Mariana.